All right, welcome to my channel. Losing daylight here, so I'm going to talk about the Brothers Karamazov whilst I smoke a stogie. So this is kind of just laid back. I wrote out a few note cards. I'm not going to hold this book up the whole time, okay? So, Brothers Karamazov. And there's so much I could say about this book, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. All right, so it was published as a serial in the Russian Messenger from January of 1879 to November of 1880. It was the last published work of Fyodor Dostoyevsky. He died on February 9th, 1881. This was originally intended to be like part one of a two-part series that was going to be titled The Life of a Great Sinner. So the plot of this book, what's this about, right? The story is about a father, Fyodor Karamazov. He's a man that's self-absorbed. He's driven by his passions, particularly lust. He doesn't particularly pay much attention to his sons, and he's murdered. Okay, that's not a spoiler because you're basically told right at the beginning in the introduction that Fyodor Karamazov is killed. So it's a little bit of a murder mystery, although that incident doesn't happen until we're quite far into the book. There are three sons. There's Dmitri. He is a soldier. He's also called Mitya. Okay. So Dmitri / Mitya, the soldier he's Fyodor's oldest son from Fyodor's first marriage. He married a wealthy woman to get her wedding dowry so he could get the money. She ran off with a seminary student. Dmitri was raised by Gregory, which was one of Fyodor Karamazov's serfs. For a while, anyways. As were his second son, Ivan, and his third son, Ilyosha. Now, Ivan and Ilyosha are from the second marriage. Dmitri, the oldest, he's a very passionate man. In some ways, he's like Fyodor in that he has a love for the ladies. He's engaged to a woman named Katerina. Katerina is not in love with Dmitri, which is interesting because Dmitri is actually in love with another woman named Grushenka. Ivan, the second brother. Okay, so you got the first marriage, you've got Dmitri, engaged to Katerina, in love with a woman named Grushenka. Got it? Complex relationships here. Second marriage of Fyodor Karamazov. He has two sons there. Ivan, university educated, European Enlightenment ideals and values. Think classical liberalism, that type of thing. All right? The third son, Alyosha, is a novice at a monastery. Very spiritual man. He has a spiritual elder. In Russia, these are known as starets, whose name is Father Zosima. Right? So, break it down. Characters. Fyodor Karamazov, dissipated man, lustful, three sons. Dmitri, the oldest. Ivan, the enlightened, educated, university type guy. Alyosha, the young, spiritually oriented, monastic novice. Grushenka, this girl, Dmitri, and Fyodor Karamazov, so the father and the eldest son, both in love with the same woman. Dmitri's engaged to Katrina. Katrina doesn't love Dmitri. She doesn't love Ivan either, but Ivan is in love with her. So we've got like these two weird love triangles going on. And about halfway through the book, somewhere in there, Fyodor gets murdered and it turns into a murder mystery, and the last part of the book turns into a courtroom drama. That's basically the plot. That's the basic plot. But it's deeper than that. So I want to give some background on Fyodor Dostoyevsky, all right? What happened? So Father Zosima, in this novel, you have like this competing themes of fathers, right? So you've got Fyodor Dostoyevsky, or Fyodor Karamazov. I'm going to keep getting it wrong. The reason why I'm getting it wrong is because Fyodor Dostoyevsky named Fyodor Karamazov after himself, all right? That's why. He named pretty much like one of the most corrupt characters in the book after himself. And what happened was Father Zosima's character. So just cut to the chase. In 1878, Alexei Dostoyevsky, who was Fyodor Dostoyevsky's son, died at the age of, he was like 2 or 3 years old, from a fit of epilepsy. Fyodor Dostoyevsky, I've talked about this when I reviewed, I think it was The Idiot. Fyodor Dostoyevsky suffered from epilepsy. He passed that on to his child. His child died of epilepsy, and in 1878, Dostoyevsky went to the Optina monastery while he was grieving, kind of shattered the man. And he spoke with Saint Ambrose of Optina. And that is the, Father Zosima's character is based off of his interactions with Saint Ambrose of Optina, Russian saint, right? So between Fyodor Karamazov and Father Zosima, they're basically a direct foil for one another. So you have this idea of fatherhood. What does it mean to be a father? In Fyodor Karamazov, you have a character that's driven by lust and passions. In Father Zosima, you have a man that is driven by love. All right, so lust versus love. That's one part of this. Now, Fyodor Dostoevsky named Alyosha, who is called right in the beginning in kind of like the introduction, the hero of the story. Alyosha is named after Fyodor Dostoevsky, novelist. He named him after his son that died. All right. Now, the book, even though it's dealing with like murder plot and all these love triangles and everything else, what the book is really about at its heart is this: the Odyssey. Which, to sum up the Odyssey, what is it? It's say, why do evil and suffering exist in the world, given the belief that God is perfectly good and all-powerful? That is what the book is wrestling with. Now, what makes it interesting is that Ivan Karamazov is a very Nietzschean character. I've been reading a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche. I just finished Beyond Good and Evil. Having read through all of this, some of the things that he says seem very Nietzschean. All right, so this is your enlightened character here. I have a note, page 75. So we'll read it here. Niasov, that is Dmitri, is talking about, he's saying something that he heard Ivan say. He says, only 5 days ago in a gathering here, principally of ladies, he, meaning Ivan, solemnly declared in an argument that there was nothing in the whole world to make men love their neighbors, that there was no law of nature, that men should love mankind, and that if there had been any love on earth before this, it was not owing to a natural law, but simply because men have believed in immortality. Ivan added in parenthesis that the whole natural law lies in that faith in immortality, right? And in everlasting life. And that if you were to destroy in mankind the belief in immortality, not only love, but every living force maintaining the life of the world would be at once dried up. Moreover, nothing then would be immoral. Everything would be lawful, even cannibalism. That's not all. He ended by asserting that for every individual who does not believe in God or immortality, the moral law of nature must immediately be changed into the exact contrary of the former religious law. He said that egoism, even to crime, must become not only lawful but recognized as the inevitable, the most rational, even honorable outcome. From this, gentleman, you can judge about the rest of our eccentric and paradoxical friend Ivan's theories. Excuse me, Dmitri cried suddenly. If I've heard correctly, crime must not only be permitted, but even recognized as the inevitable and most rational outcome for every infidel. Is that so or not? Quite so, said Father Paisy. This is a discussion that's happening at the monastery, right? I'll remember it. Having said these words, Dmitri stopped speaking as suddenly as he had begun. Everyone looked at him puzzled. Is that really your conviction as to the consequences of the disappearance of the faith in immortality? Father Zosima now asked Ivan. Yes, that was my contention. That was my contention. There is no virtue if there is no immortality. So Ivan is basically talking about Nietzsche's, maxim he writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is interesting. This is like 3 years before Thus Spoke Zarathustra was published. So God is dead, essentially, is the argument, something that is proclaimed by Nietzsche. So Ivan is a like proto-Nietzschean almost. The real nitty-gritty, so to say, of the argument about these things comes up in book 5, part 5, part called The Grand Inquisitor. I'm not going to get into this because I could talk about this for like probably 45 minutes. But one of the things that happens here in The Grand Inquisitor, it's a poem that Ivan dreams up, and essentially Christ returns to the world during the time of the Spanish Inquisition and is arrested and is tried. And it's a very interesting chapter, kind of foreshadowed earlier in the book. There's just so much depth to this. I'm not going to get in here and like talk about this for an hour because I don't want to keep you and I don't want to spoil anything. But what we really have is scientific truth, the Enlightenment, and what do you want to call it? These classical liberal values and stuff that come from Western thought and Western ideals in the person of Ivan Karamazov are contending with faith and the truth of divine revelation in the person of Jesus Christ. And you have these two opposing worldviews in conflict with one another. And it's interesting. And that's one facet of the book. So by no means is this light reading. Like, you're going to have to slow down. It's one of the things that I did. It took me over 2 weeks to read this novel. I would read a portion, I would set it down, and I would think about it. And I took my time with this. I really did. And I haven't started reading anything else. I've been thinking about the conclusion of this novel for over 24 hours. And it always fascinates me that when I read Dostoyevsky, it's almost like, I don't know, like a mirror that I'm looking into, and I'm thinking about these things and pondering them. So this, for me, is definitely, in my opinion, my personal opinion, it's my favorite book of all time. My favorite book of all time. I'm not saying it's the best book of all time. I'm saying it's my favorite book of all time. There's other things in here I could talk about. You know, there are some very strange things that happen in here from a spiritual perspective. Things that appear in some of Dostoevsky's other works that I've read. For instance, think about The Idiot. In that novel, the painting of the Dead Christ by Hans Holbein plays a prominent role in that novel. There's a character named Hippolyte, who he's the nihilistic character, and he is visited by Rogojin. This is in The Idiot. But it's never clear if Rogojin was actually there or if Hippolyte was in a fever dream state, that he was seeing an apparition of Rogojin. So was Rogojin really there? Was he having a fit of delirium, or was it like a demonic manifestation, you know, a demon essentially, in the guise of Rogojin? And Dostoevsky never tells you. He doesn't say which it is. There is a situation very similar to that in the Brothers Karamazov, where there is a manifestation of a character, and you wonder, is this really, you know, a double that's appeared here, or is it being brought on because this character is ill in a delirium? I'm not going to say who it is or whatever. I'll leave that to you, but it's interesting stuff. And of course, your worldview will determine how you interpret that, right? Like, Dostoevsky is not going to come out and tell you this is what happened. You just have to go, okay, well, am I in Ivan's worldview, right? Do I believe what Ivan is presenting here? Of course, we do have a nihilistic character in this novel as well, which is the fourth son, Shmerdyakov, who he's an illegitimate son of Fyodor Karamazov. We have nihilist characters in Dostoevsky's other works, but yeah, this book was fascinating to me. I'll definitely be reading it again in the future. I'll definitely be reading it again. I will be rereading all of these. I don't know, man. Dostoevsky gets me. I'm just gonna say it right now. He's flat out my favorite writer of all time. I mean, as it currently stands, he's my favorite. He's the best. And I'm like really, it's really interesting that he's almost foreshadowing Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch. You know, like in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov is basically a failed Übermensch. It's like he came up with the idea, Dostoevsky came up with the idea of Nietzsche's Übermensch in the 1860s, and Nietzsche's not even writing about it until like 1883. It's like prophetic. Pretty incredible. The man was just that much in touch with like the spirit of the age, I guess is what you would call it. You know, the zeitgeist. The story about a father and his sons, and maybe it's about the soul of the Russian people, you know, about Russia itself. In fact, I think that's even mentioned later on in the novel, that the sons represent different facets of Russia as it stood in, you know, 1879, 1880, when Dostoevsky's writing this. Fascinating read. All right, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. if I could go back and do this all over again, I mean, I would love to like go through Dostoyevsky's novels from an Orthodox worldview, because there's a lot of things that people that are not Orthodox Christians are not going to pick up on, you know, like they're just not going to get it. They're not going to see, because I think that Dostoevsky's Christianity is ignored by a lot of people, and this is a polemic. This is a philosophical book, only Dostoevsky's not writing his philosophy in like a set of aphorisms like Friedrich Nietzsche. He is using literature as a vehicle for his philosophical and theological themes, much as Frank Herbert does in Dune. You know, Dune is a set of philosophical novels disguised as science fiction. And Dostoevsky's kind of doing that first, and it's incredible. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.